Welcome to Politics for Patriots. Here's your host, the eviscerator of progressive nonsense, the executioner of imbecility, and the grim reaper of BS, Eddie Zipper.
Can anyone hear me out there? This is Eddie Zipper. Repeat, this is Eddie Zipper broadcasting from the government shutdown. If you're receiving this transmission, please subscribe to the Politics for Patriots podcast on iTunes so that you'll be able to receive future transmissions. Let me warn you, if this shutdown continues, I may have to switch the format of the show to Morse code. I'm so scared right now. How much longer can the country go on, knowing that we have limited staffing at many of our national parks? It's a nightmare. Alright, welcome to episode 59 of the Politics for Patriots podcast. Today, I want to cut to the real heart of this shutdown fight. As you know, the government is shut down. If you've turned on even 1 second of the 24-hour news, you know that there's a shutdown. They've got the doom and gloom clock down in the corner. 6 days, 12 hours, 42 seconds of government shutdown. So today I want to cut to the real heart of this shutdown fight. It is a major mistake to make this thing about assigning blame. Even though that's how the mainstream media loves to approach a shutdown. Ooh, whose fault is it? Is it the Republicans' fault or is it the Democrats' fault? And of course the mainstream media always decides that it's the Republicans' fault. Right? If Obama is president, it's the Republican Senate's fault. If Trump is president, obviously it's the president's fault. That's how this works every time. It's a total charade. But this is how the mainstream media does it. This is how they love to approach a shutdown. Who's to blame? And then inevitably they decide the Republicans are to blame. And then they try to beat the Republicans with the political public opinion mallet until they acquiesce. That is the wrong way to look at the shutdown fight. That is not important. It does not matter about assigning blame. Okay, actually, for most of the country, the only part of the federal government that really affects us on a daily basis or a noticeable basis at all is the U.S. Post Office. If you shut down the U.S. Post Office, then I'll probably notice that there's a government shutdown when my mail doesn't come. But if the mail keeps running, I don't know what to tell you. It just doesn't affect the lives of most Americans. Of course, I understand that it does affect some people negatively, but for most of the country, it is a relatively painless affair that can barely be noticed. Like, if I didn't keep up with the news, I would have no idea that the government is shut down because it hasn't affected my life in the least. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe if the post office shut down, then both sides wouldn't feel so comfortable digging their heels in. Now, I've read a lot of articles. Like I told you, all they want to do is attempt to blame one side or the other for the shutdown. It's just a partisan game. Okay, that one article says, this is the Trump shutdown. Trump has shut down the government. And then the next article says, this is the Schumer shutdown. Or this is the Democrat Really, no articles say that. But for the purpose of argument, I'm sure there's some conservative website articles that say this is the Schumer shutdown. But in the mainstream media, it's the Trump shutdown. Blame, 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 blame. It's just a blame game, and that's all that matters to them. And if they win that, then they can win the shutdown. Anyone who falls for this partisan game is just naive. Anybody who cares about blame being assigned is just a partisan. Who is responsible for the government shutdown? That is a really easy question to answer. Both sides shut down the government. And that is always the case. Every single time when the government shuts down, there's always both sides are responsible for it. Okay, unless one party holds the presidency, the House, and 60 Senate seats, then it requires a bipartisan agreement to pass a bill to fund the government. If Senate Democrats gave in on Trump's demands, then the government would not shut down. If Trump gave in to the Democrats, then the government would not shut down. But neither side is giving in. Ergo, both sides are shutting down the government. Period. Now, let me say that if majority ruled in the Senate the way that it is supposed to, Democrats would not have the ability to be part of shutting down the government. Their hands would be clean. Unfortunately for them, majority doesn't rule in the Senate. Thanks to Senate Rule 22, legislation cannot be passed by simple majority without 3/5 of the Senate voting to end debate. If you cannot end debate, you cannot vote, which means that essentially it takes 60 votes to pass legislation in the Senate. Now, lots of people have demanded that Mitch McConnell use the nuclear option and change the threshold from 3/5 for cloture to 50% plus 1 for cloture. I am always for that at all times, no matter who is in power, because that is the way that it is supposed to work. I think that the legislative filibuster, the ability for the minority party to stop progress and stop something that more than 50% agree with, I think that is an invitation for partisan gridlock. It gives too much power to the minority party in the Senate. But here's a word of caution right now. Don't blame Mitch McConnell. Don't get angry at Mitch McConnell if he doesn't use the nuclear option, or because he hasn't used the nuclear option, because right now it is not actually an option. Republicans do not have the votes in the Senate because they don't actually have a Senate majority right now. I mean, in name they do. Okay, there are 51 Republicans, 47 Democrats, and 2 independents. And the 2 independents obviously are both Democrats. So really it's 51 to 49. So in numbers, it looks like they have a majority right now, but they don't actually have a Senate majority because of Jeff Flake and Bob Corker. And maybe others, I don't know. Those are the 2 that I know would shoot this thing down if it actually made it to the floor. Honestly, and people, I say these things and people go, don't tell the Democrats that, but don't worry, the Democrats don't listen to me. So you don't have to worry about them finding out this advice and taking it. They're not going to. They don't listen to the show. It's a show about policy and logic and common sense, and they can't sit through 30 minutes of anything like that. So honestly, if I were Chuck Schumer, I would offer up the cloture votes so that the bill could be voted on in the Senate and fail. If he were the least bit smart, that is what he would do. If he did that, the shutdown would be 100% on the heads of the Republicans for not being able to agree. But he's not doing that. So maybe Republicans do have the votes. Who knows? I don't know. How can we possibly know when the Democrats won't allow the vote to happen? We can't conjecture what these people's votes will be. We don't know because Democrats won't allow it to be voted on. So who is to blame for the shutdown? The answer is very clearly the president and the Senate Democrats. Together, they have shut down the government because they cannot agree on the terms of keeping the government open. It's so obvious. I don't know how anyone gets roped into this mainstream media blame game nonsense. What's actually worth some analysis here, what is actually worth our time and discussion, is not whose fault the shutdown is, which is the only thing the mainstream media is interested in, is whose fault it is. But what is actually worth our time, our discussion, our analysis is the motivation that each side has for shutting down the government, right? This is a matter of policy, but they don't want to talk about the policy, but that's the only important thing. Trump's motivation is that he wants to build a wall on the southern border to fulfill his top campaign promise and to stop the flow of illegal immigration into the United States. The Senate Democrats are shutting down the government because they don't want a wall to be built. If the motivations I assigned sound reasonable to you, then you agree that both sides are shutting down the government, which is pretty much indisputable fact. I mean, if you even put 2 seconds of thought into it, you can see that it's both sides. So, President Trump wants to build the wall to stop drug trafficking, human trafficking, and the free flow of illegal immigration over the southern border. Sounds to me like a damn good use of $5 billion taxpayer dollars. I mean, if you see some of the things that the government spends way more money on than this, this is a great use of money. I'm a taxpayer. This is how I would like my money to be used. And I think a lot of people agree with me all over the country that that is a good use of taxpayer money. It's something tangible that we can see. Oh, look, our money did something useful, and now there is less flow of drugs into our country. There is, less fentanyl coming in over the southern border. There are fewer illegal immigrants coming over and taking advantage of our welfare system. There's all these benefits to this wall, and we would all be able to see it, and we would all say, hey, that was worth the money. Democrats have said over and over that they don't want to build a wall because it costs too much and it is ineffective. Right? Right after the government shut down, the next day, Schumer made a big speech on the House floor where he said, a wall is ineffective and it's too much money to spend on something ineffective. So, those are the two actual competing arguments here. The question of the government shutdown, like I said, is not whose fault it is. That's stupid. It's just a smokescreen to distract Americans from knowing the real question of the government shutdown. And the real question is an actual policy question that matters, not just a partisan politics game where you try to assign blame. The question is a wall on the southern border worth the money that it costs? The Republicans, well, mainly Trump, but the House Republicans too, maybe the Senate Republicans, we don't know, say that the answer is yes. Democrats say that the answer is no. The answer is yes. The idea that it's a stupid idea or that it's ineffective, that is a lie that the political elites made up. Okay, here's a little bit of history.
Gentlemen, I'm here to help you with your history report.
When Donald Trump was running for president, they told us it was impossible to build the wall. Every single day, the mainstream media said, oh, building a wall on the southern border is impossible. They pushed that talking point as hard as they could. One pundit said it, one pundit said that's impossible, and then the rest of the politicians and pundits fulfilled their echo chamber duties by saying, yeah, that's impossible. One pundit says it's impossible, the rest of them say, oh! Yep. That was always a dumb talking point. Ridiculous. Of course it's not impossible to build a wall. What they hope is that people, and there are people this works on in the country. I know you're not one of them because you listen to this show, but there are people that this works on. They hear enough times that it's impossible on the TV, or they read it in the Washington Post or the New York Times. They hear it so much. They're so overly exposed to that messaging that they believe it. They believe that it's impossible to build a wall on the southern border. I mean, this country, this government, we built a rocket that propelled a ship into space where it landed on the moon and people got out in special spacesuits and walked on the moon. And nobody said that that was impossible. There wasn't 24 hours of media coverage where politicians and pundits came on and said, oh, well, that's impossible to... And that's actually believable if you say that's impossible, because it sounds pretty impossible, but we did it. But somehow, all these years after we did that, they can convince you with their echo chambering that it's impossible to build a wall on the surface of the earth. Of course, that is not impossible. So it has been slowly well established now that building the wall is quite possible. Nobody says it's impossible anymore because that talking point is dead. Everybody knows that it's possible. Now the argument is that a wall won't be effective. That is also a stupid argument. But like always, one pundit says that it's ineffective, and all the other ones go, oh! Yep. And nobody in the mainstream media will disagree and say, you know what, it actually probably would be pretty effective. They don't want to paint against the grain, okay? They don't want to try to paddle against the current. They always repeat what has become conventional wisdom because they don't want to look stupid. They don't want to look like they disagree with conventional wisdom. But a lot of times, it is actually conventional wisdom that is stupid. Also, a lot of them are part of pushing the agenda anyway, so they don't care if it's stupid or wrong. Okay, the wall will be effective. Okay, everyone with a brain knows that if you are traveling from point A to point C, it'll be harder to get there if there's a big wall at point B. The real worry for Democrats is not at all that this wall would be ineffective. They're not the least bit worried about that. Everyone everywhere knows that it's easier to go from point A to point C if there is no wall at point B. Everyone knows that. That's just basic, obvious logic. They're worried that it will be effective. That's what they're worried about. They're worried that it will be effective. They know that walls work. They know that walls are effective. That's why Democratic politicians live in a house with a wall around it that is part of a gated community with a big wall around it, because they know that it's effective. Okay, they say they are for border security. Cameras, drones, more agents. Yeah, we're for border security, the Democrats say. We're just not for a wall. Anything but a wall. They doth protest too much. The reason they are willing to be for anything except a wall is because they want people to get into the country illegally. Drones, cameras, border security only stop people after they have crossed. Those things don't stop them from crossing. Once they've crossed, it's over. They can disappear. Once they've crossed, they are going to end up being here forever. The wall is the one and only thing that will actually stop them from being able to cross at all. So Democrats are for border security methods as long as they don't stop people from crossing. Right? They say they're against the wall because it's ineffective. They're for cameras, drones, other things because they say those are effective. Well, it's the exact opposite. They're against a physical barrier because it is effective. They are for everything else because it is not effective. It might catch people, but only after they've crossed. And once they've crossed, they will end up staying here. The Democratic Party wants people to cross illegally into the United States. Believe me, I am not saying that lightly. I don't like to make bold accusations like that. It's not what I do on this show. But what other conclusions can be drawn when you look at the facts? 10 years ago, they were, as a party, pro-physical barriers. Everybody has seen the tape of Schumer and Feinstein being for it. Everybody has heard about the Senate votes that were overwhelmingly for a physical barrier. What changed? 10 years ago, they certainly didn't say you were immoral if you wanted to protect the border. Now they do. Now that's immoral. So what changed? I'll tell you what changed. The Democratic Party 10 years ago did not want people to cross illegally into the United States. In 2018, they want people to cross illegally into the United States. They want them to get here, period. All right, so I've established earlier in the show that both sides are responsible for the shutdown. But why did the shutdown happen? That's the only policy question here. That's the only thing that matters. What is motivating each side? It's very simple. Republicans have shut down the government because they want to secure the southern border in order to cut off the trafficking of drugs, humans, and illegal immigration. Democrats have shut down the government to stop the southern border from being secured with a physical barrier. It is not because the wall is too expensive. Literally, nobody in this country believes that Democrats give a damn about how much anything costs. I mean, that ship sailed a long time ago. I mean, really, Democrats, it's too expensive? How stupid do you think we are? We know you don't care how expensive things are. That's all the Democratic Party does, is sit around thinking up expensive ideas. Okay, so they say it's ineffective. Okay, what's that based on? Is that based on all the success we've had securing the border without a wall? Is that based on how effective it is to not have a wall? We have an opioid crisis in this country driven primarily by cheap fentanyl, which originates in China and comes to the U.S. over the southern border. Now, I know some of it comes through the mail system, but more comes over the southern border. There are millions of people living in the U.S. illegally. Millions. Estimates range from 11 million to 20 million. I say you'd be smarter to believe the 20 million number. I would argue that it is the lack of a wall that has been ineffective. It's a border without a physical barrier that has been ineffective. That is completely obvious. But this is what Democrats do. They constantly tell us that basic logic is wrong. And the idea is that if we hear it enough times, we will be brainwashed into believing them over our own common sense. I mean, if you call me up on the phone and you say, Eddie, man, I need your advice. My house keeps getting broken into. What should I do? And I say, well, I think the smart thing to do is to leave your door open at night. Are you going to follow my advice?
Hell no.
Or are you going to hang up on me and call somebody who is not a total moron with terrible solutions to your problem? You know what, though? It will solve your problem because nobody's going to break in because now they're invited. An open door is an invitation to come in and take anything that you want. So disregard the blamers. The people who say, oh, this is Schumer oh, this is Trump shutdown. That's just a partisan game. It's a tactic to end the shutdown without having to argue the policy. If somebody tells you that it's Trump's shutdown, if you get in an argument and somebody says, oh, well, this was Trump's shutdown, Trump did this, just stipulate, okay, it's Trump's shutdown. And then move on to the policy question because that's where you're going to win. The mainstream media wants to settle this using blame. They want to blackmail Republicans into ending the shutdown, into just acquiescing to whatever the Democrats want by saying, oh, the federal workers are starving. It's lean times for government workers. That is one of the hazards of having a job that is funded with taxpayer money. I'm sorry, but it's a fact. That doesn't mean I don't feel sympathy, but the government can shut down. People have to vote for your job to be funded. When you have a job that's publicly funded, there have to be votes to use that money to fund your job. The upside is, of course, that they don't have to turn a profit. The government doesn't have to turn a profit. They don't care. They're just spending other people's money that they confiscated. They don't have to create a product that people like. So the upside is you are not going to get laid off because of the bottom line if you have a government job. The downside is the public funding for your job has to be voted on before taxpayer money can be spent on your salary. But I do feel sympathy. However, I do not think that the solution is just to always acquiesce to everything that the Democratic Party demands, even when they're the minority. Right now, they're the minority in the House and the Senate. And the president is a Republican, so if anyone should acquiesce, I certainly don't think that it should be the Republicans. That'll change on January 3rd, obviously, when Democrats take back the House, but guess what? That doesn't happen until January 3rd. And until then, the Republicans are the majority party in the House and the Senate, and there is a Republican president. So the mainstream media wants to use this blame game and this preying on your sympathy for federal workers game to try to blackmail Trump into just acquiescing to the Democrats. They don't want to have to address the actual policy that the two sides are divided over. They want to avoid the policy issue because Trump wins the policy debate. The Democrats' talking points cannot survive even the tiniest bit of scrutiny. All right, well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please subscribe on iTunes. Please tell your friends. Listen to my older episodes at www.eddiezipperer.com or on iTunes. That's it for today. I'm out of here.
You just listened to Politics for Patriots with Eddie Zipper. Email the show at patriots@eddiezipper.com and please subscribe.